Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed lunch. You may feel a bit drowsy just after lunch, but I do ask for your continued interest in this session. So with no further ado, we would like to go right into C-6 session titled Work Ethic in the Post-COVID-19 Pandemic Era. The spread of COVID had brought a lot of changes in the way we work and our interpersonal relationship and the new working environment. Under this backdrop, we are required to come up with a new work ethics framework. With respect to all of the changes that's happening around us, I believe that there are needed changes. In this session, we will look at how we could further enhance quality of life for our workers and what are the key aspects of work ethics in the post-COVID-19 pandemic era. We will hear from Professor Roger Hill from University of Georgia, Professor Howard Gordon from University of Nevada, and Professor Cho Jong-gi, Professor of Veterinary Medicine from Cheongnan National University. I would like to now turn it over to our moderator, Professor Kiung from Soongsil University, from Department of Lifelong Education. Please welcome him with a warm round of hand. Yes, good afternoon. Good to meet all of you. Yes, COVID-19 has made all of our lives more difficult, but we live with COVID now, and we are just about to enter into the post-COVID pandemic era. With this very important topic, we would like to visit our past, look at our present, and look forward to our future. I think it's very meaningful and timely that we are talking about this issue. COVID is bringing a lot of changes into the economic paradigm, but also our behavior, our habit, work ethics at workplace, as well as interpersonal relationship, as well as changes in the working environment. This new age calls for change and transformation of the paradigm. Work ethics is all about the mindset that a worker should have, the attitude, and the vision that one has vis-a-vis work. Our MC introduced the speakers for this session, and you could refer to the program book if you wish to have more information about their detailed CVs. But we have invited three very distinguished speakers. They are by far experts when it comes to work ethics, as well as learning and training. They are the world-class experts who will be sharing with us a very profound insight. It is my personal honor that I am chairing and moderating this session today. For all of you joining us via on and offline, I hope that you will be able to learn of new insights with regards to this topic of work ethics in the COVID era. Just to give you some ground rules about the session, for each of our speakers, I would like to give you 20 minutes to present your material. And I admit that that 20 minutes is not going to be ample enough for each of our speakers, but I do ask for your understanding. Since we have three speakers, we will hear 20 minutes each from individual speakers, which will add up to 60 minutes. And in the remaining time, we will take questions from the audience. And during the Q&A session, we will be able to delve deeper into important topics. So I would like to ask the participants to please submit their questions. Now, this is the second day of the Global HR Forum. We are beginning the first afternoon session of the second day. So let us begin the work ethics session. We now move on to the second speaker from the United States online. From University of Nevada, Las Vegas, Department of Teaching and Learning, we have with us Dr. Howard Gordon, professor. Professor Gordon, his career in technical education is his field of expertise. He's conducted a lot of study and research, and he's quite active in this domain. And History of Growth of Career in Technical Education in America is a publication that he wrote. Without further ado, please welcome Professor Howard Gordon with one round of applause.
Thanks for inviting me to this session, and I hope I don't get interrupted like Dr. Hill with the connection. I'm coming here from Las Vegas, so it's nighttime here in the desert. It's 9:50, and so that time is good for me because I stay up late. Ironically, the topic I presented last month at the 2020 East and Southeast Asia Conference was on ethics, ethical leadership. So I thought it would not be in good mannerism to present a topic twice. So my title is Understanding Team Leadership and Team Effectiveness. And how is this relevant to ethics? Well, without team leadership and team effectiveness, work ethic or ethics will not be at a maximum effectiveness. So, and if we're looking at post-COVID-19 or right now during COVID-19, we have noticed that in some places there are very, very poor leadership and especially team leadership. And so there are disparities or gaps in ethics, and a lot of that has to do with poor leadership. So, okay, I'd like to move forward to the next slide. It's not letting me move. Why isn't that moving? Okay, go back. Okay, so the objectives of my presentation are an overview. I will just briefly say something about objectives of team leadership. I will say a little bit about a typical team leadership model, leadership decision. Again, these are all relevant to ethics. In order to have good work ethics, you have to have these components in any model. And I'll talk about team effectiveness. Now, in your package, you should receive a questionnaire. It's an activity questionnaire, and that questionnaire answers the other area of my topic. Are we there yet? So if you're with a team or an organization, you may want to look at that questionnaire. There are 11 questions, a 4-point scale, and it gives you a profile of where your organization or team is, and you can link that to ethics. I'll have summary and references. Overall, the objectives of team leadership should be understand the role of leadership, and in understanding the role, we're talking about to avoid failure and to have success. You need to understand the role. Another objective of team leadership is really shared or distributed leadership, meaning it's not one person, it's a team, 2 or more individual. And overall, team leadership will, if it's done correctly and if it's done ethically, it should include all team members. Right now, I just want to give you an overview. This slide is focusing on a typical team leadership model. And you may say typical team leadership model. A question might be, what would be an ideal team leadership model? Well, the best team leadership model currently is HILL, H-I-L-L, HILL team leadership model. But I'm not going to look at that model today. I'm just going to give you an overall typical team leadership model, which will be beneficial ethically and during COVID or post-COVID. So basically, the model provides the leader, it's really a mental roadmap, and it helps to diagnose problems. And also, if you are able to diagnose problems, you should be able to correct the problems as well. Effective team performance, again, begins with the leader's mental model of the situation. And an example would be focus on situations with COVID from an ethical point of view, not having good leaders or not having, I would say, an ideal team leadership model. You can have chaos. And as a mental model we're talking about the components of the problem and also environmental organizational contingency. That is like the size and demographics and other variables. My next aspect of this presentation, and again, I want you to look at this in the context, and we're talking about ethics. So these are, I would say, relevant component. Some decisions which you should think of or which you should do is monitor. First one is to monitor or take action. And that means as a team, and that's based on the current information you have. The second decision is task or relational, meaning determine what task or what function or, in a sense, what intervention is needed. And the third decision, if you're with your COVID team or your organization, it's internal or external. And that is within as well as outside of the team. At this stage, I want to, based on those decisions are guided by certain functions. And for this presentation, I'm focusing on Mcgrath critical leadership functions. And this function, this particular graph or illustration, if you notice, there are 4 quadrants. Quadrant 1 is you diagnose the group deficiencies. And again, try to look at this in the context of COVID and the ethical aspect. Quadrant 2, you're talking about remedial action. You cannot do remedial action until you diagnose, okay? That's pretty much straightforward. And now the external quadrants are quadrants 3 and 4. And for quadrant 3, again, as a team leader, the focus should be on forecasting environmental changes. And again, if you look at COVID-19, the ethical aspect, there are a lot of changes need to be made. So as a team leader, that's another aspect. And quadrant number 4, just talking about prevention and also the deleterious changes or any negative impact. Based on these factors, we have internal leadership actions and external leadership actions. If you look at internal, they are talking about tasks, and I'm not going to go through the whole task there. Internal task, and for an example, teams should have clear goals, standards, effective structure, and decision-making. And decision-making will have. So we're going back to the previous slide. After monitoring the team's performance, as a leader and an ethical leader per se, you should choose to intervene in one of the following 5 areas. And for tasks, those are the 5 areas there: goal, focusing, structuring, facilitating decision, training, very important. And obviously maintaining ethical standards. Internal relations, and we're looking at the second column there. Teams that can manage conflict, collaborate well together, and build commitment will have good relationships. So after monitoring the team's performance, the leader might choose to intervene in one of the following 6 areas, whether it's coaching, collaborating, managing conflict, building commitment, satisfying needs, modeling principles. Again, these are all factors or variables, if you want to call them constructs, which are relevant to ethics. And finally, external leadership action. Teams that are well connected to and protected from their environment will likely to be more productive. If a problem is diagnosed as an environmental problem, then as a leader, you should determine the appropriate action to solve this context. So in other words, to stay viable, the team needs to monitor the environment closely and determine what action should be taken to enhance team effectiveness. Thus, in environmental monitoring suggests a leadership invention. The leader needs to select, for that invention, there are 6 choices. I have there, it could do networking, depend on the intervention or situation. It could be advocating, buffering, assessing, and sharing information. So these are some leadership actions. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these actions here. Goal focusing, structuring. These are a set of skills or action a leader who is being very ethical in leading their team should perform to improve task performance, training and maintaining standards. And also from an internal aspect, we talk about the coaching, collaborating, managing conflict, which was on the previous slide. External, again, we're just going over what was done early on: networking, advocating, buffering, negotiating, assessing. The next term I want to focus on is team effectiveness. And effectiveness is looking at 2 components. When we talk about effectiveness, we're talking about team performance and team maintenance. And researchers have done a lot of study on organizational work and effective standard and effectiveness and criteria of excellence. And the standard of effectiveness and criteria of excellence, that would address the ethical component. Here, team effectiveness, there are several researchers, and I just, for purposes and time, I just list 2, just comparison of theory and research criteria. Conditions here of group effectiveness, we're talking about Hack and Walton in 1986. They mentioned about should be clear in the conditions, engaging, enabling context, and adequate material resources. However, my main focus will be on the research by Larson and LaFasto in 1989. They focus on the characteristic of team excellence. And I want you to put this in context in terms of ethics. I want you to get the idea of time, ethics, and leadership effectiveness and understanding as a holistic model. So here, some of the characteristics of team excellence will be, it should be clear, elevating goal, result-driven, and you need to have competent leaders, collaborative climate, standards, and principle leadership. And so when we talk about goals, again, that should be clear. Most of you know you have to have your objectives. They should be motivating. Results-driven structure, and we're talking about, again, good communication system. That is also essential to have good ethics. You should communicate with your team, and also you should assess performance as you go along. Again, competent team members. These are all components related to ethics. For example, team factors. You should be openness, supportive, have a positive personal style, and also look at your core competencies: ability to do job well, problem solving, and just interpersonal and team skills. Unified commitment. Teams need to design and develop a sense of unity. Again, if that is not established, we will have problem ethically, and also with COVID-19. And other than COVID-19, just an organizational structure, you need to have unified commitment. Very, very important is the collaborative climate. And this is hard for some people, but trust and openness, honesty, respect, which should be part of ethics, as well as guiding the team in solving problems. Standards, again, task completion, results, reviewing results, rewarding results, very, very important in rewarding results. People should be acknowledged for their performance. And externally, you should recognize the team accomplishments. And I'm going to try to finish up here now. This is just 4 sets of process: cognitive, motivational, effective, integrative. Leaders should be able to monitor and take action. Effective leaders, all members of leaders should diagnose and make the right decision. Another decision is, should I intervene to meet task or relation needs? Again, that's another decision you should think of. And third decision, should I intervene internally or externally? And then there are times you should, because there may be some ethical problems of violation. And as a team leader or a team organization, you should intervene. How does team leadership work? Well, it works based on focus of team leadership, the strengths. There's some criticism and application. Again, this process should look for, provides a cognitive map. It's also helped to make some sense of complexity of groups and provides action to improve group effectiveness. Again, this is where the ethics is important. These are some strengths of this team leadership: cognitive guide, change in role. And I'm not going to go through the criticism. You can read that. Here's some videos you can look at when you have time. In summary, the takeaways are teams can be formed in different ways, depending on the context, task, and team members. Team goals should resonate with each team, and you should have responsibility for each member. Effective teams need to embrace. Keywords there are trust, support, be positive, and flexible. And here are the references. And I know I've been over time, so I thank you.
예, 고든 교수님 발표 잘 들었습니다. 고맙습니다.
Thank you, Professor Gordon. Thank you very much for the insightful presentation. When we began talking about work ethics, there were 2 factors: myself and my community, the individual and his or her community. The attitude and the correct view or occupational ethics an individual should have to contribute to the development of the community and the individual. And Professor Gordon has addressed exactly that. The right attitude is personal or at the individual level, but at the same time, it is affected by the mutual interaction between team members. So the importance of team leadership and the relevant models were explicated in the presentation, as well as the tools to monitor and measure the efficacy. Thank you once again, Professor Gordon. Last but not least, let us turn to Professor Roger Hill from Athens, Georgia. Unfortunately, Professor Hill was cut off due to connection issues. Let's try to reach Professor Hill once again. Dr. Hill, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay, good.
very good. Yeah.
I've had to relocate. My internet went down at home, and so I'm at the office again. Apologies for the interruption. I got started with this. I think maybe have gotten to this slide and was starting to talk with you, and then had that bit of interruption. Hopefully things will work better here. So I wanted to talk with you a bit about work ethic, and probably do that in 2 parts. First, to share some background that comes from about 30 years or so of work in this area. And then to talk some about the present day, and in particular, some of the impacts of COVID-19. And so Work ethic is that cultural norm that we find in the US and in Korea and all over the world, really, that motivates people to work. And there are a number of different attributes that go into work ethic, but it's a universal concern. Employers all over the globe are looking for employees and workers who have a strong work ethic and will work. They'll show up and be there. And so the work that I've done began with some review in the literature of descriptors of good workers. Ultimately, an inventory was developed. This was back during some time when I was doing my PhD studies with Dr. Gregory Petty, and we developed the Occupational Work Ethic Inventory. Following that, we worked with that inventory to do a factor analysis of a data set, pretty extensive data set, and identified these key constructs that comprise work ethic: interpersonal skills, and in particular, communication, working in a team, that type of thing; initiative, where we do things, even perhaps if we haven't been told to do it, we spot things that need to be done; and being dependable, being on time, showing up, doing what we say we're going to do, be truthful. All of those different attributes are subsumed under these three different labels here. In terms of where work ethic comes from, it is a social phenomenon. Bandura's social learning theory is undergirding the research that I've done. Work ethic is largely shaped by our family in the early years. It's obviously influenced by media and with our peers. And we need to keep this piece in mind, because we'll come back to this when we talk some about the present day and what's happening with regard to work ethic and how it's perhaps been impacted a bit by the pandemic. And so very quickly, an overview of some international research that I've done that might be of interest. The Occupational Work Ethic Inventory is one that can fairly easily be translated into other languages. It's basically 50 descriptors, has some stems, a little bit of instructions, but it's been translated into a number of different languages. And so a little over a decade ago, I did some comparative work where I had data that was collected in China, the United Arab Emirates, and of course, in the United States. Little bit of information quickly about where it came from. There was some variation in the sources of the data, but not too far off in terms of the ability to compare. In the US, it was collected at some vocational schools. I would point out that there weren't any women in the UAE study. And so because of that, I dropped the females respondents from the US and the China data, but then did some analysis to compare. In particular, was looking to see if there was a difference across countries in work ethic. And the results of the analysis that I did with that data set revealed that there was a statistical difference in initiative, not for interpersonal skills or dependability, between the three countries that I compared. And furthermore, discovered that, at least in the data set I was looking at, the respondents in China were stronger on initiative than those in the US, and those in the US were significantly stronger than those in the United Arab Emirates. And so I did conclude that there was a country effect on the OWI and that instrument. The data that I was looking at across these three samples from three different parts of the world, but it was focused on initiative and not on dependability, interpersonal skills. There were some weaknesses in the study in that it wasn't a random sample, it wasn't a particularly representative sampling, but it gave me something to start with, and this was fairly early on in some of the work that I was doing at that time. Other work, some that's closer to home where you are there. In 2008, the OWI was translated by Dr. Soo-Jung Kim, and she did some work with the instrument to identify the constructs in the Korean context that pertain to work ethic. And you can see the terms that she came up with: conscientiousness, efficiency, pleasantness, modesty, and devotion. This would be how her analysis of a fair bit of data from Korea using the OWI would define work ethic. In other words, work ethic was comprised of these 5 different components. A little bit more recently, the employability skills assessment, which is another instrument that I've used and actually developed back in the last century. It's a different format. Instead of having 50 descriptive words, it has 23 brief statements. But Dr. Hwa-Chun Park did work with that and has continued to do work with that, developing a Korean version of the employability skills assessment. And she did a factor analysis with that instrument. And these are the factors that she came up with: initiative, interpersonal skills, dependability, conscientiousness, and the reversed items. Now, the reversed items tend to show up in the English version and various other versions of some of these instruments. When you reverse those items, oftentimes the factor analysis will pick those up and pull them out. In the English version, I've chosen not to basically use those reversed items. I think they come out in the analysis because they're reversed, not because of the actual meaning of the items. And so this gives you a little bit of an overview of some of the background in terms of work ethic research. I would also mention just a couple other things. There is a work ethic website that has a lot of the materials that I've worked with over the years. It has online versions of the OWI and ESA, some research reports, instructional resources, and then basically it looks like this. That's an image of the website itself. And then the other item that kind of has come from this is some work that I've done with Jay Rajewski to develop a model for 21st century work preparation. And in particular, this has been published and looks like this. Basically, this model is derived from the question, how do we prepare people for jobs when those jobs don't yet exist? We know that people that are in college today, probably a third of them are going to move into careers and occupations that those jobs don't even exist today. And so, are we just going to train for technical skills or things of that nature, occupational expertise, when those technical skills might not even be needed? And so what are the things that are going to have lasting value? And so there are 3 different components here: career navigation, the ability to engage, to figure out what somebody's going to do for work, and the ability to continue to navigate that, because we know that in many instances, people will change the work that they're doing and need to perhaps find a new position or cultivate skills that will improve their possibilities. The work ethic piece you can see as a part of this, again, with some emphasis on communication skills, the ability to talk to a group of people and share ideas and be convincing, and all of those types of things are a part of this. And then the third component is innovation, creativity, ill-structured problem solving, and to some extent, entrepreneurship, being entrepreneurial. These are lasting skills, and these will be needed in all sorts of different occupations, including those that are going to emerge because of developing technology. And so this model is another piece of the work that I've done. And so then let's turn and think a little bit about the pandemic. That's had a real impact on work, and it's something it's fairly new in terms of the research that I'm doing related to work ethic. I don't have a lot of real solid data yet that would be able to reflect what's happened. We do know some things, though, about what the pandemic has done. Certainly, it's forced us to work remotely. Again, I'm presenting using technology instead of being there on the stage in the microphone in front of the audience that might be there at the HR forum. And so, you know, that's a result of the pandemic in large part that we've been using these tools. And so, you know, where's the work ethic in all of that, and how might it have been impacted? Well, certainly if we're working remotely, work ethic is extremely important. We have to be dependable. We have new kinds of challenges in terms of potential distractions and changes in the way we're supervised. In terms of initiative, or time management challenges with the work that we do. And then certainly the social dynamic has changed greatly by remote work. And so in terms of what we're seeing, some of this I think is related to work ethic or has an impact on work ethic, but some of it not directly related to it, but it's things that we're coping with in the world of work. We've got, at least in the United States, significant supply chain problems. We've got businesses everywhere that have help wanted signs, particularly service industries are challenged. We've got a phenomena that Anthony Klotz has labeled the Great Resignation, where there are large numbers of people who have decided to either resign or retire. And we're trying to still figure that out in terms of who those people are. In some instances, we think it's because of the risk involved. And in other cases, that there may be other factors that have been a part of that. Another piece of this, you know, if you go back in history and you look at the advent of electricity, electricity was around for quite a while before it really began to make a difference in the world in terms of industry and usefulness. I'm not sure, but what we might not be seeing something similar in terms of the impact of communication technology. We go back to about 2000 as a point where the internet really took off. Tom Friedman wrote about the world is flat in 2005, where he was seeing the internet connected world and people being empowered to share. But, you know, when electricity first came around in the late 1800s, some of the early uses were pretty kind of novel and not necessarily real serious, or at least not to the depth they could be. The internet has been similar. You have things like videos, which of course I've got Psy here and I think a Gangnam Style number of years ago, but all kinds of things that have gone viral and have been a part of the internet. But you know what? There are a lot of other uses for this technology, and remote work has been around and kind of been there for about 5 years, but the pandemic has put it on steroids. And it may well be that what we're seeing here in part as a result of the pandemic is the technology actually getting traction, and suddenly we're realizing the potential of it. And so what does that mean? Well, I've got 3 different kind of pieces here to share with you. First off, we see a lot of new businesses. You know, during the pandemic, a lot of us realized that, you know, I might not have to be in this office to do the work that I do. And if I don't have to have the office, it might be I don't have to have the company. And I think we see data that shows a lot of folks have decided to kind of try it on their own as entrepreneurs. And that's what some of the data shows. Now, it's early in the game. We'll need to wait a few years to really see if this is something that's kind of a flashpoint and then it settles back out or not. But the data does show that we have a lot of folks that have set out on their own as entrepreneurs. Another thing that has happened, and at least in the US, is that household income has come back and is basically back to pre-pandemic levels. Now, part of that is the stimulus funds that our federal government has dropped on people. But even so, we've got a lot of people that are still not back in the workplace. And yet they are not necessarily feeling financial pressures to get back into the labor force. Women in particular were impacted by the pandemic, in large part because of the number of schools that we had here in the US that went virtual. And so the students were at home, and if they're young children, they couldn't be there by themselves. Oftentimes it was the woman and rather than the man that was there caring for the children. Another indicator, just briefly, is individual trading accounts. We see a lot of people who are maybe taking their stimulus funds and investing and trying to do things to take advantage of the recovering economy. Third thing I wanted to point out is this. There's a difference between workism and work ethic. Workism is that thing where we tend to identify ourselves with our work. You know, think about when you meet somebody new and you introduce yourself to somebody that you haven't met before. Oftentimes, one of the first questions that comes along is, well, what do you do? You know, what is your work? And that's kind of what workism is. It's a way that we tend to have a purpose for our living and a purpose for our existence is through our work. Well, remote work has changed things, and in many cases, people have reflected on what they're doing with their lives, what the meaning of work is. And that doesn't mean they don't have work ethic, that they maybe have changed or decided not to be at whatever job they were in, and they've resigned, or, you know, they're doing something different. But it may be that they've got a different attitude about the meaning of work in their lives. And so we do see data, I think, that would support some of those thoughts. I think, in conclusion, that work ethic is still strong in the post-COVID-19 era. Certainly, if for somebody to be an entrepreneur and be successful, they're going to have a strong work ethic. Another thing is reflecting back. Remember where I said work ethic comes from? It's a social phenomena. It comes from those early childhood experiences and the influence of our peer group. It may be influenced some by observational learning that happened during the pandemic, but by and large, it isn't going to disappear just because we worked at home for a year and a half or worked remotely. And so I think work ethic is still there, but we might be seeing it exhibited in different ways as people have perhaps changed their outlook on what work means to them and what work they're going to do in some cases. And so those are the thoughts that I wanted to share with you. I thank you for the opportunity to be with you. And that's my presentation here for you this afternoon.
예, 힐 교수님.
Yes, thank you, Professor Hill, for your presentation. I think the last picture, I think that's a photo of Seoul, the last page of your slide. Understand that Professor Hill probably, I heard that he has a lot of Korean students, and thank you for your insight. During the presentation, Professor, you really highlighted the elements that comprise work ethics, especially in the age of post-COVID pandemic. Based on your research, you provide us and shed light on this topic. Thank you very much for that.
오프라인을 통해서
So we have a lot of participants both online and offline, and we heard the presentations both on and offline as well. So we'd like to ask our audience, if you have any questions, please submit your question through the link that we provided you. Before I receive questions, why don't I give a question to all of our three speakers? I thought of this. Professor Hill was looking at your presentation, and it says success at work. That was the last slide, how work ethics is really important for success at work and success in one's life. So in terms of work ethics, can we consider work ethics as a worker's capability and competence? Because work ethics is all about attitude, and we have an iceberg model on person's competency. So what's up above the surface, that's knowledge and technology. And those elements can be easily obtained through training or education. They could be nurtured and they could actually improve. But what's below that surface, for instance, attitude, one's mindset, those elements don't really change that easily. So as an HRD person, or if you're a teacher or a trainer, all these elements that's below the surface, how do we intervene to help and improve those aspects to further boost up teams' effectiveness? So this is an open question to all of our three speakers. Maybe we may start with Professor Gordon. What is your view on this question?
I think it's a very, very good question, but in my opinion, I think an aspect which can help this, or my perception toward this, is modeling. I think Dr. Hill mentioned about Bandura's theory, learning theory, and I think modeling is an area which can make a difference, or can really, I think, fill that gap. Not fill it, but more or less provide some context to that gap. That's my perception of it.
예, 모델링을 방식을 활용해서 격차를
Yes, we could use modeling to actually fill that gap or narrow that gap.
Work ethics is part of an individual's competencies. How about you, Professor Hill? What is your view?
Well, again, I also agree that work ethic is a competency. I would break it down, though, a bit further, because I see the different discrete components of work ethic. And so from person to person, one person might be quite strong in the area of interpersonal skills, but have some deficiencies in the area of dependability or initiative. Or vice versa, it could be some other combination. Ideally, a person has strengths in all three of those areas, but and there are many different subcomponents that are subsumed under those three factors: dependability, initiative, and interpersonal skills. And those might be defined as competencies, but as a overall piece, work ethic is a competency in and of itself, and something that is very desirable. I know when I first came into this work, it was through working with recruiting some business and industry that was being brought in, actually some of it from Korea and Japan and Asia, other places there. And we initially thought that what these companies that were considering locating in our southeastern United States would be looking for was technical skills. But it wasn't. They were willing to train technical skills, but they were looking for workers who would be dependable and who would show up and who would be able to get along with others in the workplace. And while technical skills, we have ways of kind of teaching that or helping people learn what they need. In many instances on the job, companies and corporate settings are less adept at teaching or cultivating work ethic. And so it's almost like it not only is a competence, it's a prerequisite in many cases for being successful in work and being successful in a career.
예,
Thank you very much, Professor, for that input. Professor Hill, when we connected to you the first time, there was a disconnect, and I understand that you moved to your office with better internet connectivity. Professor Hill, I think this is part of your work ethics as well. It's a very exemplary case. Now, this question to Professor Howard Gordon from our audience. The question is as follows. So a very strong work ethics really helps with improving productivity of a company. So the owner of a company or the employer just wants their employee to work hard. But we live in a world where we can't just, force them to work hard. What type of leadership is required in this day and age? Professor Gordon?
Well, I would suggest, and I think it's probably the best leadership, is what they call servant leadership. And in servant leadership, it's a leadership starting from the bottom, not from the top. That was done by Greenleaf. And a part of that is to involve or listen to your employees, and especially during COVID-19, another aspect of servant leadership is empathy. And so to answer the question, I would say servant leadership style, I would rank that as one. I definitely would not acknowledge or subscribe to autocratic leadership, which has torn a lot of organization apart. So servant leadership, in my opinion, is ideal.
예, 섬기는 리더십에 대해서 말씀.
Thank you about the servant leadership. The next question goes to Professor Roger Hill. In the formation of an individual's work ethic, the influence from his or her parents, family, friends, teachers, colleagues at work all go into play. In the post-COVID era, you don't have people around you because you're working remotely from home. So how can we replace the missing influence of the peer group and the parents and colleagues? Professor Hill, please.
Well, that has been one of the problems with the pandemic, is that we have not really had an adequate replacement for that person-to-person interaction that happens in the workplace. And I think that's been one of the reasons we've struggled. Some people have struggled, at least, with this environment. The other aspect is that work ethic is not something that happens overnight. These influences occur across a lifetime. And in many instances, it's in our early formative years as children that we develop some of these characteristics, probably some more than others. So for example, dependability, I think, is something that we learn and we that's cultivated in us early in our lives. Interpersonal skills, on the other hand, is something that develops with time. And we can improve. I know in my classes, for example, I spend a good bit of time on communication skills, the ability to put your thoughts together and to share them with a group of people in a way that it's convincing and it makes sense and your ideas are communicated. People, even adults, can develop that skill. What has happened, I think, during the pandemic is that we've needed to develop new ways of interacting with these interpersonal skills. And so we've become accustomed and adjusted to this format where we're using Zoom or something similar to have meetings and other kinds of things. I still think, though, that there have been some things that have been missing. We've noticed, at least anecdotally, we haven't conducted research on this, but I know that just in the past month or so, I've been made aware of some meetings that have occurred where people have not exhibited good interpersonal skills in this environment, and probably would have behaved differently had it been a face-to-face meeting. There are a lot of things that have built up in people's lives, some frustrations and some missing that person-to-person contact. And so I think, to some extent, the ongoing influences are there, but I think that's one of the reasons that there is a desire on the part of many people to get back to what we consider to be normal. And that if we were to go long-term with some of this remote work, we might begin to see some changes in people's work ethic. Again, as I said, it's developed over a pretty long period of time, much of it when we're young, but there are influences that would cause some people maybe to have a lesser work ethic with extended periods of time out of the workplace and away from those influences. So that could be a concern.
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Professor. So work ethics comprises of different elements, and that whole mindset gets nurtured from when we are young. And we live in a world where we need to interact with others. And it's through that contact and interpersonal relationship that will further improve or elevate work ethics. But since we live in an age of pandemic where we're doing remote working, remote schooling, that contact is, of course, deficient compared to the past. And these elements, therefore, would be quite important to think of.
We are out of time. Due to the pandemic, the way we work, our means of interpersonal communication, as well as performing work, they are all changing. In the post-pandemic era, what is the work ethic that's required? What is the effectiveness of teamwork? What is the leadership that is required? From the field of veterinary medicine, as well as other areas of expertise, we were able to share the insight and experience of distinguished scholars. In the future, such virtues as flexibility, initiative, honesty, integrity, mutual trust, interpersonal skills, the ability to communicate and trust one another, will be all the more important. So this marks the end of session C-6, which is work ethics in the post-COVID-19 era. I would like to thank our speakers and audience. Thank you very much.
네,
No, thank you very much. With the coming of the post-pandemic, the working environment has really significantly transformed. In this session, we looked at what efforts are required in order to elevate work ethics in the post-COVID world. Please, one round of applause to all of our participants. Thank you very much once again. This brings us to the end of the 6th session. We will have a 10-minute break and we will resume at 4 p.m. We'll see you soon. Thank you.